Hi guys, my name is Katie and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing part 2 of my little mini series on villains. This mini series is inspired by Vengeful by VE Schwab, which is coming out on September 25th. This is the second book in the villains duology. The first book, Vicious, is one of my all-time favorite books and inspired me to make this series. Basically, in Vicious, we follow Eli and Victor, who are college roommates, and then 10 years later, they are arch enemies. In college, they share a research passion where they soon discover that near-death experiences causes humans to develop extraordinary abilities. As the story goes on, we figured out what happens to make them become arch enemies, where the characters will go on their search for vengeance. One of the coolest books ever, and I think because we have the sequel coming out, it's the perfect time to talk about all of the villains that we have in literature. You can check out my first video here about my most hated villains, and today we're going to be talking about my most loved villains. So a hated villain is a villain that you absolutely can't stand to read about. You hate them so much, you just want them gone and you want them to stop bothering your characters. And today we're going to be talking about most loved villains. These are villains that you know they're evil, but they're like deliciously sinister, where you can't help kind of love them. So we're going to be talking about what makes these villains so great as antagonists and why I love them. Now, I'm going to try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible. However, sometimes that's just not possible when talking about the villain's arc and what is important to the character development of the villain. So if that happens, I will make sure to let you guys know and put spoiler down on the screen so that you don't accidentally spoil yourself for anything, because I know that's like the worst thing ever. To start this one off, we have the Red Queen series by Victoria Aveyard. Okay, to give a quick summary, the Red Queen is about a society that's broken up into two factions. We have the Reds that have normal red blood and are basically just commoners and peasants, and then Silvers who have silver blood and special abilities, and they're the elite, they're the ruling class. They basically have Reds as like slaves and stuff like that. They use this power that they are given to control the rest of the population. However, Mare is a normal red-blooded girl who one day discovers that she has an ability that she shouldn't have, even though her blood runs red. And because her ability was exposed in such a public setting, she's then taken in by the royal family and has to learn to survive amongst the Silvers, who she has always hated, while also spying for the rebellion. Basically, who this villain is a spoiler, so I'm going to be putting my whole discussion of this character under the spoiler tag just because I wouldn't want to ruin any twists for you guys. My most loved villain is Maven. He starts out as kind of like the secondary love interest in this little love triangle we got going on in the first book, and then we find out that he's basically been lying to Mare the entire time. And basically what makes him such an interesting villain and why I love him as a villain is he is the way that he is because his mother has the power of mind control and dissected his mind like a surgeon to take out any love he felt for his brother or Mare or any other people. Made him completely obsessed with getting power and becoming king. Because his mother messed up his mind so much, he doesn't even really know who he is as a person. He doesn't have like really any sense of actual identity, because anything that he was on his own, he was basically poked and prodded from the time he was little to be groomed into what his mother wanted him to be. And after his mother dies, basically what's left of his mind twists his once love for Mare into complete obsession. So the reason that I love him as a villain so much is it's just like he's not inherently evil. He was just made that way by an actual evil person. So he's almost the byproduct of an evil mother. That's just something that I've never really seen before in a villain, and I thought that that was just so compelling. Also, as the series goes on, you can kind of see his grip on sanity just loosening, and because he doesn't actually know who he is. His whole character arc throughout the entire series, I think, is one of the most interesting villain arcs just because of all the manipulation that went into making him a villain. He wasn't born one. Next up, we have the villain that gets introduced in City of Glass by Cassandra Clare. This is the third book in the Mortal Instruments series, and now if you haven't started this series, it is a bit of a spoiler on who this villain is, so just be aware going forward, and again, I'll put spoiler on the screen. The villain that I love is Sebastian. He is just so dark and twisted, and basically because he is Philium with demon's blood in him, he literally just like has no ability to feel like a normal human, and he's basically a psychopath. But he learns how to like mimic humans and be super charming and come off as like really friendly, but he's super manipulative and dark, and I just thought he was a really fun villain to read about. He kind of like treats everything like a game because he's literally like pure evil. Alright, next up on the list of most loved villains, we have Levana from the Lunar Chronicles. Now, Levana was pretty horrible, so some of you may be being like, why do you actually love her as a villain? Stick around and I'll tell you. But first of all, a little bit about Cinder first. The Lunar Chronicles, and Cinder specifically, are basically fairy tale retellings where each book in the series takes a sci-fi spin on a classic fairy tale. Cinder is, if you couldn't guess, a retelling of Cinderella. However, Cinder is a cyborg. Since she is a cyborg, she's a second-class citizen in the city of New Beijing. However, her life becomes intertwined with the handsome Prince Kai when she finds herself repairing one of his androids that holds a top secret piece of information. I also love that this is a Cinder retelling and it takes place in the East in New Beijing, because Cinder is actually originally a Chinese fairy tale, and so I love that like little homage to the origins of the story. Anyways, so Levana, and she has her own little novella called Ferris. I'll put a picture up here. I don't own that, but Levana is the queen of the moon, where there's a human type settlement, but the people that lived on the moon became distant enough from Earth people that they became known as lunars, and she's their queen. And on the moon, basically they have the ability to manipulate people. It's kind of like mind control. And Levana is just like, she is a retelling of the evil stepmother from Snow White, because she is just completely obsessed with beauty, and she needs everyone to think that she is like this most beautiful person ever, and so she has a glamour, but she won't be shown on TV because the glamour doesn't work on TV, so she wears a veil over her head, and just her whole obsession with like being beautiful is what drives her. And originally I wasn't like too keen on her as a villain, but then when I read Ferris and I read her backstory, and like she's literally horrible, but I'm so compelled by how evil she is just in the pursuit of beauty that she was kind of like a really fun villain to read about, and just all the things that she did in the sake of being seen as beautiful and like having this obsession with beauty. Like, it was really interesting, and so I loved her as a villain. But you know, like I loved her as a villain, but like she still sucked. So next up, we have the Darkling from the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. In this world, you have the Grisha, who are basically gifted with different kinds of talents. So we have basically elemental magic, and they can control different types of magic, and it's called the Grisha, Soldiers of the Second Army, Masters of the Small Science. So you have people that can control the living and the dead, so heartrenders and healers, summoners that do water, fire, and air, and then materialokis or whatever, and they can control the elements and metals. And basically all these special Grisha have their own army, and they're headed by the Darkling, who is the only one of his kind, and he can control darkness. And in the land of Ravka, there is a giant rift called the Unsea running through the desert, and it's basically just pure darkness. Alina Starkov is just a regular foot soldier in the normal people army. When making a trek through the Shadowfold, she releases an unknown ability where she is a sun summoner and can control light, basically the counterpart to the Darkling. The reason I love the Darkling as a villain is he starts off like very kind of in the middle, you don't know, but he's like definitely evil, and he just manipulates Alina at every turn to try and like use her power and like possess her like an object, something to own, and like that's not really good. But like he truly believes that he's in the right about what he's doing, and that always makes for a really compelling villain. And the things that you find out about his backstory and about his character. There's just so many twists and turns. Like, I don't even want to put a spoiler warning up here to talk about it. Like, you just need to read it yourself because it was really well done. The thing that I loved the most about him was just the tension between him and Alina. Like, I know a lot of people ship them together. I didn't necessarily ship them together, but I wanted them to have more scenes because the way that they just bounced off of one another, and as Alina grows stronger, she learns that the Darkling is manipulating her, and so she tries to manipulate him back, and they just both try to outmaneuver one another, and it is so intense and so interesting, and that's what makes him one of my most loved villains. Okay, and at the top of my most loved villains list, we have Count Olaf from a series of Unfortunate Events. Now, this is a little bit of a throwback, but I read a series of Unfortunate Events when I was young. Basically, it's about these 3 children, the Baudelaire orphans, who lose their parents in a fire, and then they are sent off to a distant relative, Count Olaf, to live with him, and he, throughout all 13 books, schemes to steal their fortune, but there's more involved with their story, such like a secret organization and stuff like that. And as they get sent around from family to family and place to place in each book, Count Olaf basically hunts them down and tries all these crazy schemes to steal their money. Like, obviously he's a bad guy because he's torturing children. The series of Unfortunate Events was such a fun series because Count Olaf was such a ridiculous villain, and the sad thing about it is the children always knew when he was taking on a different disguise to try and kidnap them and steal their money, and none of the other adults believed them, even though some of the disguises were a little bit out there. I don't know if any of you have seen the Netflix adaptation, but I actually like it more than the movie, and the disguises, I think Neil Patrick Harris makes a great Count Olaf, and the disguises that he has on are just so hilarious and funny. It's just so ridiculous and fun, and that just makes him my most loved villain because throughout the whole entire book it was just absolutely crazy. Alright, so that's it. Let me know down below if any of your most loved villains are on this list, and if not, who your most loved villain of all time is. And I'll see you guys in the next part of my Vengeful Villains series. Have some fun, read some books, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.